So here's assignment 11.4. First one, if a diameter of a circle is blank to a chord, then the diameter bisects the chord and its arc. It's going to be perpendicular to a chord. Number two, if one chord is perpendicular bisector of another chord, then the first chord is a diameter. Number three, in the same circle or in congruent circles, if two chords are congruent, then their corresponding minor arcs are also congruent. And if two minor arcs of a circle are congruent, then their corresponding chords are congruent. Next section says find the length of WY. So WY goes all the way across. If the left side is 7 and the right side is 7, then that means WY would be both of those together, 14. This one is asking for GD. That's just this top piece right here. So if the bottom part's 10, the top part's also 10. Number 7 says identify a pair of congruent arcs. So if these chords are congruent, that means that arc ML is going to be congruent to arc JK. It says identify a pair of congruent chords. So this arc is 50 degrees, that means the chord is going to match up with this chord. That's a P. If these chords are the same, those arcs are the same, so that means X has to equal 120. Over here, if these arcs are the same, those chords are the same, so X has to equal 9. On number 11, because this diameter is splitting this at 90 degrees, it means it has to be bisecting it and splitting it into two equal parts. So that means 5x equals 55. And then you divide both sides by 5 to find out x is 11. Number 12, AB is perpendicular to DF. So I'm going to put a little mark right there to remind me of that. It says name a pair of congruent segments. So congruent segments would be DE would have to be congruent with EF. Because if that's a diameter and it's hitting this chord at 90 degrees, it has to be bisecting that chord. Number 13, again, AB and DF are perpendicular. It says name a pair of congruent arcs. So AD, the arc, would have to be congruent with AF. First one says in circle C at the right, the diameter DE is perpendicular to the chord. I'll put a little mark right here for perpendicular. To the chord FG. It says what pair of arcs are congruent by theorem 11.4. So it'd be FE would be congruent with GE. And actually, you could also tell me DF, arc DF, is also going to be congruent to DG. So in a circle, if chords AB and DE are perpendicular and bisect each other, what can you say about AB and DE? If they bisect each other, they are both diameters. Number 3 says determine whether the AB is a diameter of the circle. Explain your reasoning. So like right here, that's not 90 degrees. So it'd be no. And it's because of that. It's supposed to be a right angle. That's not a right angle. Number 4, no, because it's not bisecting, because 11 does not equal 10. And on number 5, this one has the right angle, so it's perpendicular. It has these marks to tell you the congruent, so it's a bisector. This is a perpendicular bisector. That means that AB is a circle's diameter. Number 6, because these arcs are the same, that means the chords are the same, so that means 2x minus 3 equals x plus 1. You're going to subtract x to move it across. You're going to add 3 to move it across, and you find x. Number 7, this is a diameter and it's perpendicular. That means that it's bisecting that chord, and that means that these arcs are also congruent to each other. So 3x minus 5 equals x plus 1. You're going to subtract x to move it over. Then you're going to add 5 to move it over. Divide both sides by 2. And you find x. Number 8, it has this chord congruent to this chord, which means this arc is congruent to this arc. 5x equals 60. Divide both sides by 5. You find x. Number 9 says name any congruent arcs or chords, state a theorem that justifies your answer. So we're not going to state the theorem, but we are going to state the arcs and chords. So like wx, the arc, has to be congruent to xy, the arc. And then it already shows you that wx, the segment, is congruent to xy, the segment. Over here, we can see that jk and ml, the arcs, are both 120. And that's also going to tell us that this chord jk is going to be congruent to chord ml. For number 11, this is a diameter that's perpendicular. That means that DE and FE are congruent to each other because they're DF being split into 2 equal parts. We know that DB, the arc, is congruent to the arc BF. And then we also know that on this side, DA, the arc, has to be congruent to FA, the arc. Last part says identify a diameter of the circle. So since they tell you that AB is perpendicular to CE, so we can put a right angle here, and it says CD is congruent to DE, we can put those marks of congruence there. So a diameter would be AB. And then it asks, is CE a diameter of the circle? No. Why? Because it is the chord being bisected. Number 14, name a pair of congruent arcs. So we can go with CB, that's an arc, and it'll be congruent to EB, that's another arc.